Most people think they need to spend hundreds of dollars before their vegetable garden can look neat and last for years, and that mistake quietly steals both their money and their time. I have watched neighbors buy expensive metal kits and fancy raised beds only to see them rust, warp, or fall apart after a few seasons, while perfectly good materials sat unused in their own backyard. If you keep believing that a beautiful garden starts at the store, you will miss the easiest projects you can build with your own hands in just a day or two, and some of them can serve you faithfully for many years. I learned this lesson the slow way. After wasting money on things I really did not need, I started looking around my own property instead of looking through catalogs. Old boards, fallen branches, leftover bricks, stones from an old path, even logs that many people would burn or throw away suddenly became useful again. That changed the way I looked at every corner of my yard. Now, before I build a single garden bed, I first ask myself one simple question. What do I already have that can become something useful? You would be surprised how often the answer is right in front of you. Over the next few minutes, I want to show you 15 garden bed borders that almost anyone can build without special skills, without expensive tools, and mostly without spending any money at all. Some are perfect if you only have one small vegetable bed behind the house. Others are strong enough for larger gardens where you grow food for the whole family. Every one of them has something I like. They look good, they hold the soil where it belongs, they make mowing and weeding easier, and most importantly, they give you that quiet satisfaction that comes from saying, "I built this myself." A few of these ideas were shown to me many years ago by older gardeners who believed nothing useful should ever go to waste, and I still use their advice today. But there is one simple border that almost nobody builds anymore, even though it costs almost nothing, lasts surprisingly well, and can completely change the look of a backyard in just a weekend. That is where I want to begin. The very first border I ever built with my own hands was made from old wooden boards that had been leaning against the back of my shed for years. Most people would have taken them to the dump, but an older neighbor stopped me and smiled. He told me that weathered wood often has more character than brand new lumber, and if it is still solid, it deserves another life. I followed his advice, cleaned the boards with a stiff brush, pulled out the rusty nails, and cut away only the rotten ends. In less than one afternoon, I had enough material for a neat raised bed that looked better than I expected. The secret was not making it perfect. I simply accepted the small cracks and faded color because they gave the garden a warm and natural look. I fixed the corners together with leftover screws and short pieces of timber that nobody else wanted. If you already have a drill, this project can easily be finished in one day, and even if you have to borrow one from a friend, the cost is still almost nothing. One thing I learned is to keep the bed no wider than you can comfortably reach from both sides. That simple decision saves your back every time you plant, weed, or harvest. The second border surprised me even more because it came from something people usually consider a problem instead of a resource. After a storm, I collected thick tree branches that had fallen around the yard instead of cutting them into firewood. I trimmed them to similar lengths and placed them upright side by side around a vegetable bed. Some pieces were thicker than others, but together they created a rustic fence that looked like it had always belonged there. A few years later, it still catches visitors' attention because every piece has its own shape and texture. If you have access to straight branches or small logs, you can build something similar in just a couple of days without buying a single board. Another favorite of mine is a border made from natural field stones. Every spring I would find more stones while digging new planting areas, and instead of piling them into a corner, I started stacking them around my beds. There is no need for cement if you choose stones that fit together reasonably well. The weight keeps everything stable, and over time the border actually begins to look even better as small patches of moss appear between the stones. Many people think building with stone takes weeks, but a modest bed can often be finished over a relaxed weekend. These first three ideas taught me something I never forgot. The strongest gardens are often built from materials that were already waiting quietly in the yard. But the next border uses an everyday item that many families throw away without a second thought. And once you see how simple it is, you may never look at that pile of unwanted material the same way again. Dot. The next idea came from something I used to ignore every single week: cardboard boxes. Years ago, I would flatten them and put them out for recycling without giving them another thought, until one spring when I had more beds planned than I had materials. An old gardener laughed and told me to save every plain cardboard box I could find. We removed the tape, avoided the glossy printed pieces, soaked the cardboard with water, and placed several thick layers around the outside of the beds before covering them with soil, wood chips, and a few flat stones to keep everything in place. It looked surprisingly tidy once everything settled, and it did two useful jobs at once. It created a clean edge around the garden while helping keep weeds from creeping in. By the end of the season, the cardboard had already started breaking down naturally, feeding the soil little by little. It was not a permanent border like stone or wood, but for someone starting a new garden with almost no budget, it worked far better than I ever expected. Then I discovered another forgotten material that many people already have sitting behind an old garage: used bricks. They do not have to match in color or size. In fact, I think mixed bricks often make the garden look even more welcoming because they tell a story. I found mine from an old walkway that had been taken apart years before. Instead of laying them flat, I stood many of them on their sides, slightly buried in the ground. That simple trick created a stronger edge and made mowing around the beds much easier. The border stayed in place through heavy rain, summer heat, and freezing winters without any special care. Even if you only collect a few bricks at a time from renovation projects or neighbors who no longer need them, you can slowly build beautiful borders without spending anything. One of my favorite projects, though, came from old pallets. Now you do have to be careful because not every pallet is suitable for the garden. I only use heat-treated pallets that are clearly marked and in good condition. Once taken apart, the boards become excellent material for small raised beds. The wood is already weathered, easy to cut, and usually free if you ask local businesses that have no further use for them. I built several compact beds this way, perfect for herbs, lettuce, carrots, and onions. Most of the work was simply removing nails and trimming rough edges. It took me about 2 days to finish everything, and the result looked far more expensive than it really was. These projects reminded me that building a beautiful garden is not about finding perfect materials. It is about seeing value where other people only see waste. But there is another old method that almost disappeared from modern backyards, one that uses living plants themselves as the border, and every year it becomes more beautiful instead of wearing out. One of the most overlooked ways to create a beautiful garden border is to let the plants do part of the work for you. I learned this from an elderly couple who had one of the neatest vegetable gardens I had ever seen. There were no expensive fences, no decorative metal panels, and no fancy landscaping. Instead, each bed was outlined with low-growing herbs and flowers that naturally formed a soft, living border. At first, I thought it was only for decoration, but they explained that those plants helped attract pollinators, filled empty spaces that weeds would otherwise invade, and made every bed look finished without spending any money. Since then, I have planted chives, thyme, oregano, marigolds, and even small patches of parsley along the edges of different beds. The effect is surprisingly attractive, especially once everything begins to grow together. It may take a little longer than building with wood or stone, but by the second season the border often looks fuller and stronger than anything you could buy. Another project that deserves much more attention uses old logs and thick tree trunks. Whenever I remove a small tree or lose one during a storm, I almost never cut the trunk into firewood right away. Instead, I cut sections between 12 and 18 inches long and place them side by side around new garden beds. Some stand upright while others are laid horizontally depending on the design I want. The larger pieces become solid natural borders that blend beautifully with vegetables, flowers, and fruit bushes. They also create small hiding places for helpful insects and slowly return organic matter to the soil as the years pass. Many people worry that logs will not last, but hardwood can remain useful for several seasons, especially if the thickest sections are used. One weekend is usually enough to build an entire border this way if the logs are already available. Another forgotten method uses woven branches, sometimes called wattle fencing. This technique has been around for centuries because it works, and it costs almost nothing if you have access to flexible branches from willow, hazel, or other young trees. After placing sturdy wooden stakes into the ground every couple of feet, I weave the long branches in and out between them until a sturdy woven wall begins to appear. It sounds complicated, but after the first few rows the pattern becomes almost relaxing. Every fence has its own personality because no two branches are exactly alike. Children often stop to look at these borders because they seem handmade in a way that modern materials rarely do. If a branch eventually breaks, I simply weave in another one instead of rebuilding the entire border. That is one of the reasons old gardeners like this method so much. Repairs take minutes instead of hours. By now, you may notice a pattern. The best garden borders are often built from materials nature already provides, or from things that would otherwise be thrown away. But there are still several ideas left that are even stronger, even more durable, and one of them can transform an ordinary backyard into something that looks like it has belonged to the family for generations. As the years went by, I realized that some of the strongest garden borders are made from materials people pass by every day without even noticing. One of my favorites is made from old concrete blocks that someone was throwing away after tearing down a small shed. At first, they looked rough and unattractive, but after brushing off the dirt and placing them level around a vegetable bed, they became one of the most practical borders I have ever built. The blocks are heavy enough that they stay exactly where you put them, even after heavy rain or freezing winters. Another thing I enjoy is that the openings inside many concrete blocks can become small planting pockets. I often fill them with herbs, flowers, or even strawberries, and suddenly the border serves two purposes instead of one. It looks neat, saves space, and gives the whole garden a unique character. Another forgotten idea uses old roof tiles or broken paving stones that would otherwise end up in a landfill. They do not have to be perfect. In fact, slightly different shapes often make the border more interesting. I simply press each piece halfway into the soil at a slight angle so they overlap one another. It creates a clean edge that keeps mulch and soil inside the bed while adding an old-fashioned charm that reminds me of gardens I visited as a young man. Many people think broken materials are useless, but they often become some of the most beautiful parts of the garden. Then there's an idea that surprised even me: old metal barrels that had rusted beyond repair. Instead of throwing them away, I carefully cut them into wide rings and placed those rings directly on the ground to create instant raised beds. Filled with good soil and compost, they became perfect places for tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and even potatoes. They warm up quickly in spring and require almost no maintenance. If cutting metal is not something you are comfortable doing, you can often find already damaged livestock troughs, old wash tubs, or similar containers that work just as well. One project usually takes only a few hours to finish. Another simple method that deserves attention uses woven wire fencing together with natural materials. If you have leftover wire mesh from another project, bend it into the shape of the bed and secure it with wooden stakes. Then fill the space inside the wire with stones, broken bricks, or even pieces of concrete collected around the property. What begins as a pile of leftover material slowly becomes a solid decorative wall that is both attractive and extremely durable. Every time I build something like this, I remember an older friend telling me that almost everything has value if you stop looking at it as trash. I believe that is one of the greatest lessons gardening has ever taught me. Still, there are 3 more border ideas that I save for last because they combine beauty, strength, and simplicity in a way that makes people stop, look twice and ask how they can build the very same thing in their own backyard. Now we come to 3 border ideas that I recommend to almost anyone because they are simple to build, surprisingly durable, and easy to adapt whether you have a small backyard or a larger vegetable garden. The first is a border made from reclaimed railway sleepers or thick landscape timbers that someone no longer needs. These heavy pieces of wood can often be found through local renovation projects or people replacing old garden features. Before using any reclaimed timber, I always make sure it is safe for growing food and has not been treated with harmful chemicals. Once that is checked, building the bed becomes very straightforward. I level the ground, lay the timbers one on top of another if I want extra height, and secure the corners with long screws or metal rods driven into the soil. In 2 or 3 days of relaxed work, I have a raised bed that feels solid enough to last for many years. The wide wooden edges also become a comfortable place to sit while planting seedlings or harvesting vegetables, and anyone over 50 quickly learns to appreciate anything that saves the knees and back. Another excellent border uses nothing more than woven sacks filled with soil and covered by natural stone. Years ago, I saw an older gardener using this method to level a sloping yard. Instead of buying expensive retaining blocks, he filled old feed sacks with soil, stacked them carefully, and then faced the outside with flat stones gathered from nearby fields. From the front, it looked like a traditional stone wall, but inside it was built almost entirely from materials he already had. The beds stayed stable through heavy rain, and over time small creeping plants softened the appearance until the border blended perfectly with the landscape. It reminded me that patience often creates the most beautiful results. The final idea is one that visitors ask about more than any other. It combines short wooden posts with horizontal rails made from trimmed branches. The posts are driven firmly into the ground every few feet, and the rails are attached with simple screws or strong wire. It is not designed to keep large animals out, but it clearly defines the garden space and gives the entire area the welcoming appearance of an old country homestead. Climbing flowers can grow along it, herbs can be planted beneath it, and every season it seems to become more attractive instead of less. None of these projects require expensive equipment or advanced carpentry skills. Most of the work is slow, steady, and enjoyable, and that is exactly how I believe gardening should feel. There is something deeply satisfying about standing back at the end of the day, looking at a border you built with your own hands, and realizing that almost every piece came from your own property or from materials someone else was ready to throw away. And before we finish, I want to share the final 3 ideas and one simple principle that completely changed the way I build every new garden bed, no matter how large or how small it may be. The last 3 border ideas are probably the easiest for anyone who wants great results without spending much money. One of them uses recycled glass bottles. At first I thought this idea would look strange, but after seeing it in an old country garden, I completely changed my mind. Bottles of similar size are pushed upside down into the soil close together, creating a surprisingly strong edge that catches the morning and evening sunlight in a beautiful way. Green and brown bottles give the border a natural appearance, while clear bottles reflect the light and make the garden feel brighter. If one bottle breaks, replacing it takes only a minute. Another simple idea is using old clay roof tiles placed upright in overlapping rows. They are heavy enough to stay in place, they drain water well, and they add an old-fashioned charm that fits almost any vegetable garden. I have even mixed roof tiles with leftover bricks when I did not have enough of either material, and the result looked as though it had always been planned that way. The final border is perhaps the simplest of all. It is nothing more than a shallow trench filled with coarse wood chips, small stones, or gravel collected over time. The trench clearly separates the lawn from the beds, keeps grass from spreading where it does not belong, and makes walking around the garden easier after rain. It may not be the tallest border, but it is one of the easiest to maintain and one of the quickest to build. Looking back over all these years, I have realized that the best gardens were never the ones where the owner spent the most money. They were the gardens where every material had a purpose and every project was completed with patience instead of rushing. Some of these borders can be finished in a single afternoon. Others may take a full weekend, and the larger ones may take 5 or even 7 days if you are working at a relaxed pace. There is nothing wrong with taking your time. Gardening has never been a race. Every board you straighten, every stone you place, every branch you weave into position becomes part of a space that you and your family will enjoy for years. That is worth far more than anything bought from a store. My advice is simple. Before you spend a single dollar, walk slowly around your property. Look behind the shed, beside the fence, under old trees, and in forgotten corners. You may already have enough wood, stone, brick, branches, logs, or other useful materials to build something that is both practical and beautiful. Start with the smallest bed if you are unsure. Finish it well. Learn what works best in your yard, then build the next one with a little more confidence. Before long, your entire garden will have its own character, and every border will remind you that good ideas do not have to be expensive. I hope at least one of these 15 ideas inspires your next project. And if it does, let me know which one you plan to build first. In the next video, I will show you even more forgotten backyard projects that can make a vegetable garden easier to maintain, more productive, and just as satisfying to build with your own hands.